Hello and welcome to the final technical session for the Southern District ITE annual virtual meeting hosted by the North Carolina section of ITE, where we were supposed to be in nice sunny Wilmington, North Carolina on the coast. However, we are here virtually again, unfortunately. Part of my duties are to share our sponsors. You see our sponsors here. And let them flip through there while I'm talking a little bit more. And Christina is going to show a little video of the sponsor. Kittelson Associates is actually sponsoring this session. And this session is the transit session. Remember the time when 50 of us all climbed in to the same vehicle is the title of this session. I'm trying to be a little Southern here. Got my seersucker blazer on. Got inspiration from Burek to Psycho earlier this week, who had the bow tie on. Burek always looks nice and sharp, and I haven't worn a blazer in forever with virtual meetings. So even though it's Casual Friday, Christina, do you want to show? Could you show the video for Kittelson Associates, our sponsors? Okay. All right. Thank you for showing that, and thank you to all of our sponsors. As you see them kind of flashing up behind me, our first presenters today is a session on electric or bus electrification and the Greensboro story of how Greensboro decided to start converting their diesel bus fleet to electric vehicles. And we have Hanna Cockburn, who is Director of Transportation for the City of Greensboro. And we have Reynolds and Dale Hill, both with Proterra with us today to talk a little bit about their company. Dale has an interesting story with Proterra. He is the founder of Proterra, has a long career as a mechanical engineer, going all the way back to 1969. I think that's when, Dale, you graduated there from the Tornews University in Texas. I'm reading here that you were beside an 18-wheeler in your 1969 VW Bug at a stoplight, and that this 18-wheeler was actually an electric-powered 18-wheeler, and they blew you off the start line there at the stoplight, and you've had a passion ever since for electric vehicles, leading up to when in 1998, Dale was kind of on the cutting edge when the Denver Regional Transportation District wanted to replace a fleet of diesel buses to serve Denver's 16th Street Mall, a mile-long pedestrian promenade in the heart of downtown Denver, with a fleet of gas CNG fueled hybrid electric buses. And Dale and his group came up with a unique way to power those buses with batteries. The batteries were actually powered, or electricity was provided to those batteries through a generator. And that generator was powered with a Ford Pinto engine. And since then, Dale has evolved the electric bus phenomenon through the years, where in 2004, he started Proterra. And I'm not going to talk too much more about how he founded Proterra, because I think he's going to go into that presentation a little more. And then we have Reynolds with us. And Eric works with Proterra for quite some time. He's the director of channel sales with Proterra. In his current role, Eric supports world-class transportation partners in bringing battery electric commercial vehicles to market. He previously served as a regional sales director for Proterra Transit, helping transit agencies transition their fleets to zero-emission battery electric buses. Eric has 20 years of experience in the transportation and logistics field and is a graduate of Virginia Tech with a bachelor's degree in science, bachelor's of science degree in marketing from Virginia Tech. And then wrapping up this first electric bus session is Hanna Cockburn, who is a new director for the City of Greensboro Department of Transportation, where she started in April of 2020. She oversees transportation planning, facility design, traffic operations, parking, public transportation, and safety programming. Hanna holds a Bachelor's of Arts degree from Cornell College and a Master's of Arts in Urban and Regional Planning from Minnesota State University. She is a member of the American Planning Association, American Institute of Certified Planners, and she is currently president of the North Carolina chapter of the American Planning Association. She's an active member in the Transportation Research Board, Standing Committee on Transportation Needs of National Parks and Public Lands. We're going to start out with a presentation from Eric and Dale about an overview of electric buses and Proterra. So Eric and Dale, if y'all want to take over.
Thanks. This is Eric. If you can hear me, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and we'll make sure that we get it working properly.
Need to back it up a few slides.
Yeah, I'm not where we need to be, but we'll go backwards here. Hang on. Sorry about that. There we go. Dale, why don't you go ahead and get us started?
Okay, well, thanks everybody for tuning in. It's always an honor when we can share all the exciting things that are going on at Proterra these days. And so with that, if you'll give us the first slide, it's very humbling to me to think of a company that my wife and I started essentially on a credit card with a promise from the Federal Transit Administration that the check was in the mail. To think that today that company, thanks to the current IPO that we're involved in through a SPAC or a merger, is worth several $1 billion. That's extremely humbling to an old hillbilly like me. But Proterra today has 2 assembly plants. The main assembly plant's in Greenville, South Carolina. We have a second assembly plant and new battery manufacturing plant. Our second battery manufacturing plant's in LA. And then our headquarters, our battery test lab, our battery engineering crew, and our prototype lab is in Burlingame, California, which is across the street from the San Francisco airport. As you look here at our, we've got over 700 employees today, over 1,200 vehicles sold. We've delivered about 550, 600 vehicles to date. We have over 18 million service miles. So we're the ones that started the paradigm shift worldwide to battery electric transportation. And we continue to spend the dollars to make sure that we stay in that leadership role. You see we pulled expertise from just about every vehicle discipline that's out there from our transportation expertise. And the thing that's important to customers is, are you going to be around 10 years from now? We've been blessed with quite a collection of investors, including BMW, Daimler, General Motors, 2 of the largest utility companies in the United States, all led by Kleiner Perkins and then supported by several other Wall Street based companies. So we are financially very strong. As I mentioned earlier, we're in the middle of an IPO right now. There's just a tremendous amount going on at Proterra. Next slide. So as I mentioned, we have a plant. You see our plant in Greenville, our plant in LA. and then our automated battery plant in Burlingame, California. And it's really, if you ever get an opportunity to visit, it's interesting to see the batteries being made. So that's all done robotically. So a little history behind the company. Based on the success of the Denver 16th Street Mall project that Adam mentioned, we were approached in 2004 by the Federal Transit Administration saying that we want somebody to design the bus of tomorrow. We know we won't get that from conventional bus manufacturer because they assemble components, they don't develop technology. So if we show you where there's some grant money, would you put your old team back together? And so the funds had been appropriated for a fuel cell bus program. I told the FTA I thought we were at a crossroads where the battery technology would leapfrog fuel cell technology. And so if we were awarded the funds, we'd build a battery electric bus. We put a small fuel cell on it as a range extender, but by the end of that project, we'd figure out how to make a bus run all day on batteries. What you see on the upper left-hand corner here is a 3-foot model that we made of the bus that we were proposing. And being an entrepreneur, you have to be part engineer, part snake oil salesman. So for 2 years, I traveled around the country showing people a picture of this bus with the Denver in the background, telling them that was our new bus. And most people thought that was a real bus. And we finally, that allowed us though to get to our first bus, which you see here in the right-hand corner. And to make that bus run all day on battery, we did a fast charging because battery technology was in its infancy then. The bus had a 30-mile range and it would spend 5 minutes charging every hour as it repeated its route. Today, the bus you see in the lower left-hand corner is our Generation 5 ZX5 bus. That bus has a capability now of running 275 to 300 miles on a single battery charge. And so, next slide. So that's how far we've come in such a short period of time. We just introduced our 5th generation buses, the X5. And if you'll, next slide. The thing about this new bus, it's got the longest range of any battery electric bus in the industry. It carries about 200 kilowatt hours more power than anybody else. It accelerates 1.5 times faster with our new dual power drivetrain, 1.5 times faster than a diesel bus. And that's really an experience to be able to accelerate onto an interstate highway and stay up with a Chevy Suburban and stay up with the movement of traffic flow. And the important thing, if you pick up 5 minutes an hour every day for a 16-hour day, you've picked up about an hour and a half worth of additional route service time of that vehicle. So it's important, but it also allows us to pull an 8 to 10% grade at 45 miles an hour and stay up with traffic flow going up a long hill for cities like Seattle and San Francisco. That becomes very important. We have taken our original platform and we continue to improve that to get to our 5th generation bus. We now have over 18 million service miles, which is pretty phenomenal when you stop about and think about it. And our bus from the very get-go was designed from the ground up to be a battery electric bus. It allowed us to do unique things like place the battery packs underneath the bus between the wheels and below the strike line of a bumper in the case of a side impact. Much safer than putting the batteries on the roof of the bus where it makes the bus very unstable, or putting it in the rear of the bus where if you were hit in the rear with a rear end collision that you would create a thermal event. So that's the bus that we have. Next slide. So what we did at Proterra then, you say, well, why did this paradigm shift start in transit? It started in transit because, first of all, transit is federally funded. The fleets are professionally maintained and operated. They operate on a fixed route that's predictable. They return to a fixed location every night, and they're maintained by professionally trained mechanics. And so once we matured that technology, then we were able to then take that and to disseminate that into a lot of other transportation industries not only the battery technology, the drivetrain technology, but also developing our own line of chargers because charging is 50% of the equation if you can't restore the energy in a reasonable period of time. And that's unique in the bus world. The bus manufacturers never had to supply the filling station to go with their vehicle. They now have to do that. And so Eric was our champion salesman on the transit side, winning Best Salesman Award several years. And so it was perfect for him with his school bus background to transition to heading up the Proterra Power and the Proterra Energy sales endeavor. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Eric and let him give you a little explanation into the doors, the many doors that the development of the transit buses open to the transportation industry as a whole. Eric?
Great, thank you, Dale. Appreciate that. My name is Eric Reynolds. I am based in Greenville, South Carolina, where one of our facilities is that Dale mentioned. I've been at Proterra 6 years now, the first 5 years as a transit sales, on our transit sales team, as Dale mentioned. I'm thrilled to be here because one of the very first sales calls I made when I barely knew anything about the bus other than it had some batteries was to Adam Fischer. And he was a champion in Greensboro and was very interested, and it took us a long time to get to where we are today. But Adam brought his team many times to Greenville to see our facility, and so it's always wonderful to be able to present and see Adam again. And so thank you for letting Dale not be here. As Dale mentioned, we have transitioned. I have personally transitioned to what's referred to as Proterra Powered. Proterra Powered is taking our core competencies of battery, energy dense battery packs, our charging infrastructure, and using that technology to power other vehicles. We do not make a school bus. We'll let the professionals continue to make coach buses and school buses, et cetera. But these world-class OEMs are looking to us for our battery technology. These are some of the partners that we have publicly announced. There's others in the pipeline that are not announced yet, but the one that a lot of people are interested in is the yellow school bus. Obviously, kids are running every day in school buses. School buses are very safe, but till today they've not, they've obviously been mainly run on diesel. So we're thrilled with our partnership with Daimler and Thomas Built Buses, which is based in High Point, North Carolina. The battery packs are sent directly to Freightliner in Gaffney, South Carolina. The chassis is built with our battery packs fitting safely in between the frame rails of the chassis. That chassis is then delivered to High Point, where the bus body is assembled on that chassis. That is our partner that we're furthest along with. We've got getting close to about 100 bus deliveries and many orders coming through that. Everyone is very excited about the idea of kids running on clean energy. School buses also make perfect sense because of very low miles. And then the buses are obviously idle for large periods of time. So that allows for vehicle to grid capabilities to stabilize the grid by putting energy from the batteries back into the grid. You'll see some of our other partners, Van Hole, which is a coach bus, Freightliner, we're working on a step van chassis for first mile, last mile package deliveries. Optimal is a shuttle bus. Bus Tech is an Australian transit bus company, and then recently announced a partnership for excavator equipment with Komatsu. The reason that a lot of these OEMs are looking for Proterra, one is our proven technology. Again, as Dale mentioned, 18 million miles of transit miles on the same battery pack, but also the packs are scalable, they're stackable. We can design packs using the same cell technology and module technology into different types and different sizes that you can see here throughout this equipment here. What's important to know is all of these packs start with a cylindrical cell. That's done for many reasons. We've currently partnered with LG Chem as a tier 1 cell supplier. However, we're always looking at new technology. That is our partnership today. Cells are very important from a safety standpoint. If there were to be some sort of thermal event, by having thousands and thousands of cells into these packs, it can be contained to that cell level It will not propagate throughout the pack, so it's very safe. Also, using cells technology is extremely dense and provides quite a bit of energy into each one of those packs. As mentioned, you start with a cell. Cells go into a block. Block becomes a module, and each one of those modules is about, in our transit pack, there's about 15. There's 15 of those modules and over 8,000 cells in each one of those packs. We use a ballistic grade casing. So this battery pack is made for specifically heavy duty transportation. It is a very, very bad life to be a battery at Proterra. As Dale mentioned, our research labs, we do some pretty bad things to batteries there to prove their safety. We like to shoot them with guns. We set them on fire. We drown them, drop manhole covers on them to simulate pyramid drops, to simulate the entire weight of a bus. So the takeaway is that over 18 million miles, extremely, extremely safe, well-tested, durable battery packs. I mentioned one of the reasons it's important to use a cell as for what was referred to as passive propagation resistance. By having thousands of cells, if there were to be some sort of thermal event, instead of using large pouch cells, by having thousands and thousands of cylindrical cells, if there were to be some sort of event, it is contained at that cell level. You will not have any damage to the entire pack, and you will eliminate the possibility of a thermal runaway. Fortunately, and obviously knock on wood, through all the safety and testing of our teams, we've not had any sort of event like that. Also, what's on everyone's mind as well as this becomes more mainstream is our packs are made for reusable and recycling. Before we go, we've recently announced a partnership with a company out of Carson City, Nevada, Redwood Materials, for our battery recycling. However, prior to these batteries needing to be recycled, once they are met their useful life in a transit application or a school bus application, there is still plenty of energy left into these batteries. They're designed to be stored, to be stackable for energy to reuse as energy storage. So you can see here that these packs are made with the design of reuse and recycling once they have deemed to be no longer capable of meeting, the daily needs of a transit route. Dale mentioned our Proterra Energy team. I want to touch on this just for one quick second, and because I want to show this picture here. And this is Adam's dream, and you can see the Proterra. Now this was a couple of years ago. There's more of these chargers now, but you can see 6 or 10 60 kilowatt chargers, and then the dispensers run down the bus line. And so that is again, a project that was near and dear to my heart. And it's always great to see these buses in service and to see the Proterra systems there. So I just wanted to show that picture so you can see what Adam worked on while he was at the Transit Authority, or with the city, I'm sorry. Lastly, I mentioned vehicle to grid. That is becoming very popular buzz phrase in the school bus industry because of the low mileage and the amount of time that school buses sit idle in the summer. We're currently working with 3 different utilities on a vehicle to grid application. The most prominent one that people may have heard of is with Dominion Energy in Virginia. We're in the process and just about wrapped up delivering all 50 school buses. They're going to 15 different school districts. To be able to have vehicle to grid, obviously you need a vehicle that is capable of discharging energy back through our charging system, and then a cloud management, a DERM system to manage the energy flow back and forth to the grid. So we could talk for that forever, but for the sake of time, just wanted to let everyone know that these are becoming, this is becoming real, and this is something that we're actively working on today with different utilities. That's all that we have here. Adam, turn this over to Hanna, and we'll stop sharing. And any questions? Are we good, Adam?
Yes, I think we're good, and we want to turn over to Hanna Cockburn, the new Director of Transportation for the City of Greensboro, and she'll go over the Greensboro experience with electric buses. Hanna, sorry for the short time that you have.
That's okay. Thanks, Adam. And thanks to both Eric and Dale for that great introduction to the electric vehicles that we have deployed here in Greensboro. I'm really grateful to the North Carolina section of ITE and the Southern District for the opportunity to share our experience here in Greensboro. And thank you to Adam for your long-standing leadership in envisioning what a fully electric fleet could look like here in Greensboro. I'll move us through just a handful of slides to give you a sense of Greensboro's transit fleet today. We currently operate 55 fixed route vehicles every day of the week, 7 days a week, all year long. In 2019, kind of the last year we had a normal set of operating circumstances, we provided 3.1 million transit trips along 21 routes that operate throughout the city of Greensboro. And our budget right now is around $24 million a year. As both Dale, Eric, and Adam have alluded to, Greensboro began its foray into electrified transit operations in 2018 with the launch of the first electric fleet of transit vehicles in North Carolina, and we believe the southeastern United States. So we've got just a couple pictures from that event. We were proud to have the governor with us that day to launch these vehicles. But the things that you all might be more interested in are why we, as the city and the transit agency, went in the direction of electric buses. And there are several overarching reasons. Those include the fact that it delivers lower operating costs that offset the higher initial cost. It is not just reducing pollution, but eliminating a big chunk of transportation pollution by trading electric vehicles for diesel vehicles. And of course, it is more energy efficient. We have demonstrated that the efficiency is 4 times that of an electric bus. And of course, the quiet operations in the environment are just an additional benefit. So today, Greensboro has a mixed fleet. We've got 28 diesel buses, which make up approximately half of our fleet, 11 hybrid vehicles, and then a total of 16 electric vehicles with more under order from Proterra. And we are working right now on an earmark request to add an additional 3 vehicles that will, again, continue to replace our diesel fleet. I think the most exciting thing that I have to share with all of you today are some of the real performance metrics of our electric fleet. This is data that we collect from our vehicles to demonstrate how well our electric fleet is performing. And these vehicles are operating on Greensboro city streets every single day, the hottest day of the year, the coldest day of the year. So we have real high levels of confidence around the performance that we're seeing from these vehicles. So since 2019, which was really our first full year of operations, you can see that even during the pandemic, we were able to demonstrate an enormous savings in fuel. So we offset 166,000 gallons of fuel. And that translates into savings that is close to reaching $500,000 in just really 2 and a chunk of a single operating year. Another advantage that electric vehicles provide are the offsets of emissions. So Greensboro is in an emissions maintenance area. So being able to continue to track and explain how our investments in electric vehicles have resulted in the offset of 1,369 metric tons of CO. So to give you a sense, this is a visualization of what a metric ton looks like. But if it's more helpful to you, a typical African elephant weighs 1 ton. So we removed 1,300 elephants of CO2 emissions from the air. So we have some pretty bold goals when it comes to electrification in our transit system. And I use this picture from our history museum because we here in Greensboro at one time had an electrified trolley system. So what is old is new again. Our goal is to complete our fleet conversion in both fixed route and our paratransit fleet. That will come next. But there are some significant challenges to that. Securing the funding that's associated with the purchase of these vehicles. They are still at this point more expensive than a traditional vehicle, and having FTA catch up to the funding needs in electrification will be very helpful. And then of course, being the first out of the gate presents some challenges as the technology improves and evolves in ensuring that our current vehicles that are operating can operate through their useful life series and still continue to be contributing to our fleet operations and making sure that our charging technology, the battery technology, and the operating technology all work together. So again, I'm very grateful for the opportunity to share this with you today and happy to answer questions.
Hey, Hannah, since we're running a little on time, I'm going to save all the questions till the end. Can you hang around throughout the whole session? Let's do that if we can. Thank you all, Hannah, Dale, and Eric for that. I want to move on to our next topic. Transit as a woman's issue, why planners should prioritize women in transit design, planning, and operation. And we have 2 speakers here on this topic, Michelle Nance and Katie Kutcher. Michelle Nance is an AICP, is the Regional Planning Director for the Centralina Carolina Council, providing planning services to 9 counties in the greater Charlotte region. Michelle is currently directing an NC South Carolina 12-county region transit planning effort, Connect Beyond, a regional mobility initiative. Michelle holds a Master's of Public Administration and a BS in Urban and Regional Planning from East Carolina University. She is past president of the NC chapter of the American Planning Association and was honored as one of 2017 50 most influential women in the Charlotte region and was named 2017 Woman of the Year by the Mecklenburg Times. Katie has a master's in gerontology and has been working in the aging services field for more than 14 years. She has been with the Centralina Area Agency on Aging since 2010 and serves as an aging programs coordinator. Katie works with home and community-based services and supports, including health and wellness programs, nutrition programs, and transportation services. Katie provides community education about aging and disability awareness and cultural competency, and is a part-time instructor for the UNC Charlotte gerontology program. Michelle, I think, are you up first? And my only comment on this is when I first saw it, I thought women's issues, well, what about men? But three of my 4 favorite people in the whole world are women, so I'm all attuned. And 2 of those women are getting a little older and have some transportation issues. So carry it away, Michelle.
Well, thank you, Adam. It's such a pleasure to be here today with all the folks from the Southern Council of ITE. You know, Katie, as you heard, Katie works in the area of seniors and aging, and I work in the area of land use planning and growth. And so, you know, we understand we're a bit out of our environment here. We appreciate you letting us put our nose under the tent, so to speak. But one of the things that we've learned through our work in individual areas is that, you know, there's a lot of there's a lot of overlap when you're thinking about communities in a holistic way and thinking about how to provide access to all the things that people need to get to, whether it's jobs or education or medical services, all the great things that transit actually can do in a community. So again, we're really pleased to be here. For those of you that don't know about our organization, Centralina Regional Council, just to give you a geography piece here, we serve 9 counties that's right on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina in the Charlotte, North Carolina region. And we lead regional collaboration, but we also spark local action to improve quality of life and mobility and access. But here's the key. We've got 4 NPOs, 2 rural planning organizations, 17 agencies that do transit in our broader economic region. So basically we herd cats, and we are often asked to lead transportation projects and coordinate projects across multiple states, North Carolina and South Carolina, related to transit, to freight, connected and autonomous vehicles. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to talk about transit as a woman's issue. Now, obviously, transit has benefits for the whole community, but it's kind of like when you're dealing with complete streets. If you design those complete streets for kids that are 8 years old and seniors that are 80 years old, you're really going to hit a lot of the in between. But we're going to talk a little bit about women in transit. We're also going to talk about, why is this issue especially important to women? We'll talk about some of the challenges that women face daily and how transit can support mitigating some of those, and then give you some recommendations that perhaps you can use in your own agencies. So a little bit about, why this came about. In the Charlotte region, before we started the Connect Beyond project that you just heard about, we did 2 years of intensive engagement across the communities. And one of the things we kept hearing over and over is, obviously, transit is a long-term issue. You'll see my little one here a few years ago. How long is it going to take me to get to work in 2050? Overwhelming population growth in this area, and we needed to figure out how we maintain that quality of life. And the things that we were hearing had a lot to do with what I considered women's issues. And I started thinking about what is the intersection of these two things. And, when I started talking about that, some folks said, it kind of cautioned me against having those conversations that could be deemed a little bit in an advocacy way. But, I'm a bit stubborn, and I think it's okay as long as I admit that. So I started doing some research on it, pulled together a journal article for the Carolina Planning Journal that was published in 2020. And this presentation really builds on that research. So before we get started into the specifics, just a little bit of context. This photo really shows the opening of a bridge across the Catawba River linking 2 of our counties. That's not important to folks that live in other states, but what is important is that this bridge is still in use. So it was christened in 1920, still in use, just now thinking about, a new bridge, and we're wanting to get room for transit placed on the new bridge. So I only show this to reiterate the importance of the transportation concepts and infrastructure that we put in place now, and the thought process for who's here now and who's in the future. It's just such a long-standing implications for how our communities will continue to grow and thrive. Adam mentioned it at the beginning. Transportation choices are beneficial for all community members, not just women. But we're going to focus in on some of that. So we're really going to look at this in terms of a funnel. So we're going to give a few concepts about why transit's important at the regional level, at the community level, and then we'll say at the individual level, and then women in particular. So we'll kind of move through this really fast. Transit's good at the regional level, connecting those areas of work. We have over 50% of the people in our region live in one county and work in another. So they are always on the move across not only county lines, but also state lines. And employers have said they needed those predictable travel times. And so transit can help with that. Also, our region, we have a lot of headquarters for businesses. And so being globally competitive, transit is one of those things that's really come to the forefront recently. So at the local scale, especially for light rail types of investments, obviously that's a big economic boon to the community, but really on a smaller scale, when you think about the bike and pedestrian facilities, all the active transportation that gets people to transit, it's really a way to grow your place, right? So it's place making and developing those communities that have the quality of life that people have grown to expect. So Katie's going to cover some of the benefits to the individual level, and then we'll start moving into why transit is important to women.
Absolutely. So we know that transit is beneficial for individuals. And so we always say at the Area Agency on Aging that transportation truly is a lifeline for older adults, people with disabilities, caregivers, the list goes on. And so we know that it's also important because it helps to provide access to jobs and fosters upward social and economic mobility. And we're going to touch on that a little more. And of course, it provides greater access to education, medical facilities, healthy foods, the list goes on and on. So it's a really integral part of a healthy community. So one other thing we want to mention is, of course, and y'all know, transit's an important factor in that long-term upward mobility. So there's this national household transportation expenses average of $8,755 per year. So we know that that makes transportation the second largest household expenditure after housing. So that is huge and has huge implications. So again, as we're thinking of planning and really helping to serve the community, we know if we can reduce the number of household vehicles or reduce the number of trips that those vehicles are making, we're really helping again to support individuals with those financial implications. So to take a look at the economic mobility, so some of you may recognize this, some of you may not, but this is a picture from the Charlotte Motor Speedway. And you can see, I don't know which race car driver it is, but pulling up the end there, we have a little indicator that this is representing Charlotte, and I'll tell you why. Economic mobility is a huge topic in our region, and this is really stemming from a local study that came out, or a regional study that came out, that actually looked at the 50 metros across the nation and how they addressed economic mobility. And so when they really evaluated that, unfortunately, the Charlotte Metro came in dead last. So that's what we're representing there. And so what does that mean? So that means, according to the study, individuals who are born into poverty in the Charlotte region are very likely to remain in poverty. And so that was a huge area of concern for many sectors in our Charlotte region. And of course, it really increased interest in a number of conversations and initiatives, and some of those including affordable housing, policing, elementary literacy, and of course, transit. So again, we know transit is a core element to providing mobility and access. And so while we recognize that equity can really mean a lot of things and encompass a lot of areas, we really want to focus on equity in terms of how women can access and benefit from transit services. So what we'd like to ask you to do is we want to hear from you. I know it's been a long week. Y'all had several days of the conference. We're rounding out the end of the week, but we'd like to ask you to participate in this poll. So you can see the instructions at the top of the screen there. So you could open up a new web browser to visit the poll EV, or you could text Centralina to 22333. And we want to hear from you, which of the factors below may impact women in transit. So again, if you could open that web browser, or you can text it on your cell phone and let us know, and it should let you actually choose more than one as well. So I'm seeing some of the answers come on in. So take a moment to do that, again, whether in a new web browser or on your cell phone. You should be able to choose more than one, and we'll give folks a minute to respond. And I'll just touch on these. So we've got wage gap listed here, poverty, have multiple jobs, land use, safety, caring for an older adult, caring for children, life expectancy, and other. So in giving everyone just a few moments, we can see how those responses are coming in, and really lots of response for all of these different areas. And I love also, we're seeing that other, so we'd love to hear, you can pop it in the chat box or in the Q&A also, and we can get to that as well. But absolutely, so just as y'all are indicating, really all of these factors can impact women and transit access in a variety of different ways. And we're going to take a closer look at each of these categories. I'll turn it to you, Michelle.
Good, thank you. So let's talk about some of the challenges faced by women that make it important to have a highly functioning transit system in the community or region. First of all, when you look at the largest 12 transit systems in the US, only Seattle has a higher percentage of male riders. And so this overrepresentation of women that are already riding transit highlights the need to ensure that transit systems are inclusive of women's values and interests, just by the numbers alone. And of course, these were the largest systems. You know, that may not hold true for every system across the US, but it would be interesting. And I would ask that as you do your surveys for your transit ridership, that you think about, you know, asking about gender if you don't already, just so that you can be, you'll know that, you'll have some of the things in mind that we're going to talk about later as you go through your policy and even your infrastructure investments related to transit. Also, travel patterns are different for females than males. So women's daily movements are unique. They're based on the responsibilities and challenges that we have daily. Female trips through a community often crisscross and zigzag. One trip often involves multiple destinations. So think about this, you know, where people are going. It's not always just work to home. It's work to home, to daycare, to the grocery store. And this concept actually has a name. It's called trip chaining. And the Federal Highway Administration really defines this as a sequence of trips bounded by stops of 30 minutes or less. And so, long story short, in effect, women tend to take a greater number of shorter trips to dispersed locations at more varied times. Now, that is a challenge for transit, right? Because that you're talking about headways, you're talking about frequencies, and we'll even get into some of the fare issues. So that really has a key implication for how we plan our transit service moving forward. And so let's talk about why this matters now, even in COVID.
So just a couple of quick points we want to make in considering this topic during COVID-19. For one thing, we know, of course, that it was so important and remains important for those essential workers to be able to get to and from where they need to be in our communities. And according to the Economic Policy Institute, women make up 49% of all essential workers in all the various categories. And the majority of essential workers in sectors such as healthcare, as many as 76%, and government and community-based services, as many as 73% of those individuals. And so, again, really important that they are able to access and get to and from where they need to. But in terms of COVID-19, we know it has completely turned the world upside down, right? There's been so many implications in responding and pivoting to our new current needs during COVID-19 and projecting into the future needs as well. And so one of the things we just want to mention is we really see this as an opportunity because so many different transit agencies, planning organizations are making, again, those accommodations and those changes now, modifying services, whether it's frequency, route, fares, and we really encourage that while those discussions are taking place, to consider, again, how to best meet the needs of diverse populations and really consider some of these maybe gender specific kind of implications for women during that planning process. All right, and just as mentioned, you saw this on the poll. Here are the things we're going to take a closer look at line by line. And I'll turn it over to you, Michelle, to talk about the wage gap and poverty.
Thank you, Katie. So women continue to earn on average less than men, despite making up half the workforce, serving as the sole or co-breadwinner of about half of American families with children, and receiving more college and graduate degrees than men. So you can see here that the gap still remains. We know that through COVID, even though we were seeing gains in this, there is going to be a stall out for a time period post-COVID before that starts ramping up again. And so really this is just to show that, that wage gap influences the number of women in poverty And while poverty rates in the U.S. continue to fall in general, being a woman increases the odds of being poor. So you need to have multiple transportation options because, as Katie mentioned, transportation and having a car is expensive. And so when we look at poverty rates overall, they're higher for women, but they're especially higher for, older women. And we'll talk a little bit about that in just a bit. The difference between male and female poverty rates post 75 is quite remarkable. But I really wanted to point attention to the households with children. So, if you have male and female household leaders, the poverty rate's fairly low. If you have male household with children, poverty rate's actually pretty high. But then when you look at female-headed households with children, it goes even higher. And you'll see why this is even more important as we think about transit when we talk about the caregiver aspect and how you are actually having to move around, with kids in tow a lot of times. And so this really just goes to show that for females, it is a bigger issue than maybe for others. And so the next thing is holding multiple jobs. So while the share of workers holding multiple jobs has been declining steadily, women are still more likely to have multiple jobs, a trend that's even more pronounced for younger women in their 20s. So nationally, 4.3 million women work more than one job, and nearly 50% work a secondary part-time or full-time, which I couldn't believe, job on top of a full-time job that they already have. So, I can't even imagine 2 full-time jobs, but these conditions impact women's travel patterns. So not having a car makes employment difficult with one job. Can you imagine having 2 jobs, multiple jobs? It's really unbearable. So another thing that, we can't not mention is land use. So lane uses tend to be fairly diverse and dispersed, and that creates issues that transit has often has a difficult time mitigating. So, affordable housing is not always in the right spot, meaning women have to move further away from employment, childcare, groceries, you name it, things they need for daily life. And so I would just say on this point, if this was an easy issue, it would already be solved. But as you're working in transportation in your communities, and you're talking with the MPOs, of course, you're talking with the transit providers, you've got to talk to your land use planners as well. Understand the context, what's going on in the community, where the land use is, not only now, but where they set to go in the future. And so lastly, for my part, I wanted to talk about safety. So there's long-term discrimination that women face, especially in public spaces, that has really discouraged us from traveling alone. And again, this is not just for women. I think about, older adults, male or female. How would you feel dropping your grandmother or grandfather off at this picture on the bottom and saying, okay, now find your way? It's a little bit intimidating. So there was a study that was done in New York, and yes, that's New York and not the South, but I think some of the concepts do carry over, where they basically looked at women's propensity to take transit, especially in the evenings, versus hailing a cab or taking Uber, Lyft, or other sort of transit that actually transportation that costs more. And what they found was that on average, women were spending an additional $50 a month on their transportation, simply and primarily due to safety concerns and issues. Now, how does this translate on a local level? It really translates to making sure that your transit stops are well lit, that you might have some call boxes around, that you have safety on your buses or your trains, that people just feel safe. A lot of safety is perception. And so again, I ask you when you're doing your surveys, this is a concept that you may want to consider asking about. Katie, I'll turn it to you.
All right. So just to look at a couple other factors to consider. So we're looking at the challenge of caring for an older adult. And so there's a common misconception that in America, most older adults live in nursing homes. And really, the studies show that it's just over 2% of people who are 65 years of age or older actually reside in nursing homes. So what that means is the majority of long-term care services and supports are actually being provided through family or what we would call informal caregivers. And so as much as 80% of that long-term care is provided through caregivers. And when we look at caregivers, we can see here that women are more likely to be caregivers than males. So not to say that there aren't male caregivers, but again, more likely to be caregivers. And so that goes back to what Michelle talked about that trip chaining. So what kind of trip needs they may need and how that could impact, again, their travel patterns. So similarly, we're looking at childcare. So while fathers have nearly tripled the time that they spend with their or caring for children since 1965, so seeing a lot of change in that, men spend on average 6 hours per week, and women spend about 12 hours per week caring for children. So again, considering then the implications of the types of trips that would be in need, the times of the trips that might be needed, and all of that then again connects to the ability again to access transit. So then let's take a look at life expectancy. And this slide kind of makes us laugh sometimes, right? Because it says it's a challenge, life expectancy, that women live longer. Well, that's a great thing, right? So it should be a challenge. So longevity is certainly a wonderful thing. But in terms of challenges, what it does mean is that someone may be living longer relying upon public transit and public transit options. So the American Journal for Public Health says that Americans are outliving their ability to drive safely. And for women, on average, it would be 10 years. And for men, on average, it would be 7 years. So again, women will rely on public transit longer than their male counterparts. Recommendations, Michelle?
Sure. So we've got some recommendations here, and we're not going to go through all of these on the slides. But what we did want to do is include them so that as this is obviously being recorded and as you get a copy of these slides, that you'll have these at the ready so that you can refer back to these. And so that's really our goal here. But they're really in 4 distinct categories: policy, access and affordability, the built environment, which that goes back to the land use piece, and then other considerations. And so, Katie, let's go through these next 4 slides, but we'll just kind of highlight a few of these. I guess number 1 on policy, we all know that people want the way home, right? So what if something happens in the day? We've got to have a way that we're going to get home, an emergency ride that needs to be highly publicized. There needs to be, rider-focused coordination policies related to transit, reducing the additive cost of layered fees. So we talked about that trip chaining. If you're not thinking about that as you set your fee structure, there could really be an additive effect that really has implications, especially for women. Okay, next slide. And then when we're thinking about access and affordability, these are just some ideas that you can be thinking about. One is, of course, education and where you can go to help people learn how to basically ride a bus, the travel training. So be thinking about, your faith community, the social services, the senior centers, places that women may go at the PTA. So these are just different places that you may want to do that education that, women will be more likely to pick up on. I would also say, just as you're advertising transit, make sure that you think about what women are facing day to day, and you use that in your advertising so that they are automatically drawn to this mode of transportation and understand that it's for them, that it's safe, and that it can be accessible for their needs. Okay, next. And then when we think about the built environment, obviously this is a key piece, but again, we go back to the safety of lighting, making sure there's not, large bushes and trees that are right around your, transit stops so that it feels very safe, including women in the design of transit facilities. All we have to do is look at how some of the household features are created with, maybe things that are too high or too low for women. you know, have them in at the front end on your committees. Make sure that when you're selecting consultants, you may want to have some females on there just to give these perspectives and make sure that you're inclusive all the way through. And then let's look at the other, just a few other things related to, hey, if you're mentoring folks, you may want to think about, you know, girls' career pathways into not only planning, but engineering, and mentoring them so that they can be in the profession and have that impact that we know we all want them to make. So again, there's a lot more here. We're not going to go through it all, but just wanted to give you a taste of some of the recommendations that perhaps you can dig into later.
And I think in the sake of time too, we can go ahead and pause here. I know there's other speakers to get to. And I think, Adam, were you wanting to hold questions until the end?
Yeah, why don't we do that? And just to try to kind of move it along, and we'll see how much time we have at the end for questions, if you don't mind. And plus it'll keep people focused all the way to the end if they got something burning and they can't sign off now. And thank you, Michelle and Katie. That's a very good presentation and interesting in how we need to be more all-encompassing in our thoughts, not only in transit, but all of transportation and providing equitable access for all. Our next speaker is Burek, Cesme, who is currently working for Kittelson and Associates in Washington, D.C. as a senior engineer and associates. And he is also an adjunct professor at George Mason University. Dr. Cesme earned his bachelor's degree in civil engineering from Middle East Technical University in Turkey. He graduated from Northeastern University with a master's and PhD degree in transportation engineering. He has 10 years of working experience in transportation engineering on a wide range of projects. His expertise include traffic signal systems, microsimulation, operation of public transportation, urban transportation systems, and transportation research with over 15 journal publications and working on several NCHRP and FHWA projects. Dr. Cesme is also the section president of the Washington, D.C. section. Dr. Cesme, take it away with your presentation on roadway improvements to improve bus speed and reliability.
Thank you, Adam. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and let's see. Can everyone see the screen in the slide mode? Perfect. So yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for having me here. I'll be talking about also transit, but specifically District Department of Transportation, or also known as DDOT's bus priority program and the bus priority toolbox that we developed for them to improve speed and reliability for buses in Washington, D.C. So a little bit of background on the program first. So there was an overall program that was established over the last couple of years, which is called as Bus Priority Program. And this project was under the toolbox that we developed is just part of the program. And the big question is, what was the reason to establish this program was, if you look at the sort of the transit projects in Washington, D.C. over the last decade or so, the main challenge was the inability to deliver most of the transit projects in a fast way. So if you look at the streetcar program, there were a lot of challenges. For the 16th Street Northwest bus lanes, it took almost 10 years with planning and then more planning. And then there's the analysis and environmental analysis and the design of the project. So there was, again, a need to streamline these projects to provide faster delivery. The other challenge, as we all know, with the transit projects are just the process and the coordination that's required both within internal agencies as well as with the external stakeholders. So this program and the toolbox also was designed to address and minimize that internal process. Specifically, we are not talking about with this toolbox the capital projects, but it's more so relatively small, quick build projects, and we'll get into those treatments later. So those were sort of the primary motivations for the bus priority program. As I mentioned earlier, the toolbox is again just one piece of the program that's with the goals of helping to help identify uniform bus priority treatments within the district. And one thing that was really important, obviously, was instead of just looking at the TCRP reports or what the other peer cities have been doing, which was our starting point, we also had to align the priority treatments with the specific goals and objectives that DDOT has to make sure they are relevant and applicable within the context that we are working in. And finally, there was a lot of meetings and communication, again, both internally and externally, to make sure there is consensus on the treatments and the specifics of the treatments that I'll speak to a little bit. So the vision for the toolbox was DDOT wanted to see two different versions of the toolbox. One is what we're calling here as the first bullet, agency-facing version, and the second one is public-facing version. The agency-facing version includes more information and details specific to the description that's more tailored for planners and engineers. It has detailed information relevant to the thresholds. And when I say thresholds, so for example, if you're talking about bus lanes or transit signal priority, we just didn't want to say, it's applicable when intersections are congested. That's fine, but we wanted to be a little more specific and give them actual directions in terms of, whether it's in the transit signal priority case, things like volume to capacity ratio or, green to cycle length ratio. Again, things that are more relevant. The public-facing version is more simplified version that includes lots of images, graphics. That's going to be relatively easy for the public to understand. So it has, the structure is similar, however, the information is less detailed. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the vision for the toolbox was to help DDOT identify these bus priority treatments in a relatively fast way without requiring a lot of planning type of analysis. And why we think this toolbox is more unique compared to the other ones that you can find out there, as I mentioned earlier, when we looked at the literature and talked to peer cities, one sort of limitation that we have observed was that some of the toolboxes were pretty broad. Like I think NACTO does a great job creating these sort of guidebooks, both not just on the transit side, but also on the pedestrian and bicycle side. But sometimes it tends to be generally broad. So we wanted to take it from that level to the next level to give a little more direction to DDOT. And as I mentioned earlier, again, we only wanted to focus on the treatments that are applicable for DDOT. So for example, one potential bus priority treatment is bus on shoulder. For the case of Washington, DC, there are hardly any freeways and buses are actually not using freeways. So that specific treatment, while it can be very helpful for different agencies, it wasn't helpful at all for DDOT. So we decided not to include. The other good example is we had a group that I'll present later that specifically focuses on the interaction and the conflicts between buses and bikes, especially for the bus lanes, which is a relatively big issue, especially for major cities. So that's why we wanted to include several treatments to address bus-bike interactions. So just quickly, what was the process to develop this toolbox? It was actually developed in the middle of the pandemic, which obviously is the case over the last year or so. And why this is important, when you are trying to build consensus on the specific treatments that you want to include, the thresholds, the details, it requires a lot of internal and external coordination. So it's not as just simple as you can go and knock someone's door or try to schedule a quick meeting. So we had lots of virtual meetings. And we tried to use a series of meetings in the sense that we started pretty high level saying, hey, these are the treatment types that we are thinking. Once everyone is happy with those treatment types, the next step was, okay, let's start to talk about some of the details of the treatment types, rather than just giving all this information to the agencies. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, again, the toolbox was integrated into the overall program guide, which is something that I'm not talking today here as much. So let's take a quick look at some of the details of the toolbox, about this bus priority toolbox. So we created approximately 25 bus priority treatments, but we wanted to organize them in a way that's going to be user-friendly. We just didn't want to throw 25 treatments out there and expect that the planners and the practitioners will be able to find what they're looking for relatively easily. So we said, let's try to group them first. So here you can see 5 groupings that we have came up with. The first one is bus operation strategies. That's more typical, like your bus stop consolidation or route redesign, the strategies that are typically controlled by the transit agency. The second group was traffic control strategies. This is your transit signal priority, queue jump lanes. That's typically the DOT, owned by DOT, essentially. The third group was the bus stop infrastructure strategies. Again, this is specific to treatments that can help improve bus operations and safety within a bus stop and help them enter and exit bus stops relatively easily. We wanted to separate bus lanes as a separate group because there is just so much interest within the DC area, not just for DDOT, but also for other jurisdictions to accelerate some of the bus lane projects. So that's something that I'll discuss as well. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, the fifth group, which was strategies to address conflicts between bikes and buses. The other thing we wanted to include in the toolbox was, and it's a little probably difficult for you to read, but essentially on the left, you see each category like bus operation strategies and the specific treatments that we locate under. And sort of each column indicates the specific objective that will be addressed by the subject bus priority treatment. The filled circles are indicating the primary objective and the hollow ones are indicating the secondary objective. So for example, if we look at, let's say transit signal priority, the main goal of transit signal priority is to reduce signal delay. So that's why its primary goal is here. It can also help with congestion delay. On the other hand, queue jumps are typically designed to help reduce congestion delay. So you can see sort of, this is the primary goal. In certain cases, depending on how queue jumps are designed, they can also help buses enter traffic after they service stop. So that's a secondary goal. So why we try to do this? Again, trying to help practitioners use the toolbox and to guide them a little bit. Well, what's your problem? And once you identify your initial problem at a high level, you can go and look at this table and say, okay, well, maybe I should be looking at stop relocation and, or let's say congestion delay. Maybe I should be looking at bus lanes or queue jumps, or if the goal is the time spent at bus stops, then maybe you should be looking at stop rebalancing, also known as consolidation, and etc. Each treatment that we identified follows the same structure, again, to make it easier and to provide consistency within the documents. So we start with a description and objective, just a high-level introduction of what this treatment is and what it does. The typical applications and thresholds, this is, I'll give an example later, trying to give the context, under what context these type of treatments can be applicable and can be more beneficial. Other considerations, our focus was primarily on the operational side, but obviously we know that these bus priority treatments sometimes require other things like, what about safety? What about parking? If I put a bus lane, what's going to be the environmental impacts? So we wanted to link and provide additional context on other considerations. The next one is relationship to other treatments. So here the idea is we know that sometimes these treatments complement each other rather than just being applied independently. So we wanted to provide that linkage again between the treatments. Moving forwards, applicability to DC. So this was something important for DDOT. They wanted to know if these treatments have already been applied. So just wanted to give that information to the reader. And the last three were the potential benefits. So based on our review of the literature, talking to peer cities and looking at the TCRP reports, and also, doing just coordinating with DDOT for the, based on the past projects that they have implemented, trying to understand what are some potential benefits of these treatments. And finally, just to give a little more information on who is the leading agency to implement these treatments, whether it's the transit agency, whether it's the DOT, or whether it's the joint efforts, as well as specific implementation examples. So I'm just going to show one example here, so you'll hopefully be able to understand it better. So here in this case, I picked the queue jump as a toolbox treatments layout. So here again, we have a description and objective, some images in the documents. Obviously, I converted everything from a PDF format to a slide. But you can kind of see that, if you don't know what a queue jump is, it helps buses move ahead of the queue. Typically, there's if it's a near side bus stop, there's a queue jump signal, a bus signal to help them merge back to the traffic. The thresholds, the effectiveness of queue jumps will vary based on the right turn volume, especially if the right turns are also permitted on the queue jump lane. So providing some thresholds there, relationship to other treatments and some potential benefits. Like for example, you can expect delay reduction of up to 8 seconds per intersection. It will change, but sort of we try to give some ranges to do that. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to quickly go over the strategies, and I'm not going to spend too much time. So under bus operation strategies, we identify 4 unique treatments. So the one that you're seeing up top is the stop relocation. Typically, near side to far side stop relocation helps, but sometimes it's the other way around. Stop consolidation here again. I don't want to get into the details. The other one is route design and alignment, and then finally fare payment and boarding changes. Specifically in this case, the all board payment that helps reduce the dwell time substantially. Under traffic control strategies, we have 3 treatments, specifically bus movement exemptions, transit signal priority, and queue jumps. Under bus stop infrastructure strategies, bus stop cross-hatching, if you're not familiar with this, it's not as common as some other treatments. This is what you're seeing here. The idea is to help increase enforcement and making sure vehicles are not stopping on the bus stops, to help buses enter these stops easily. Bus stop lengthening, this is more common. If you have certain stops that are used by multiple routes that have high frequency, like here, you can see an example. The concrete pad in DC indicates the bus stop area. You can kind of see here the sign. The bus is stopping here. There's a second bus that's going to pull over. It just helps, again, making sure there's no spillover from the bus stops. And finally, the bus ball pods that you can see here. Obviously, there are different variations of bus ball pods. This is more of a quick implementation. If you do more of a concrete pad, that obviously requires a lot more design and engineering. We identify a lot more treatments on the bus lane strategies, and that's because, again, there's just a lot of interest. The curbside bus lanes, this is, again, that you can see here, typically right turns are allowed. The offset bus lanes, if you're not familiar with the term, this is the image from New York City. The idea is you put the bus lane not on the curb, but there's an offset lane. It's offset from the curb to make sure that there's less friction of the parking vehicles. You can see here in this case, there's a taxi pulled over to pick up or drop off a passenger. So just to basically reduce that friction as much as possible with the offset bus lanes. Contraflow bus lanes, here you can see an image from San Francisco. The bus bay is also known as the transit way. Probably the most popular example these days is the 14th Street one in New York City, in Manhattan. And the last 2 are the red colored pavement, which you can all see here, as well as the automated bus lane enforcement. You can see a camera here from San Francisco again, to help increase the compliance or help reduce the non-compliance of the buses. And the last group is the bicycle and bus strategies. Again, there's in Washington, DC, a lot of bus activity as well as the bicycle activity to make sure we address these conflicts. And we have 5 separate treatments here. Separated bike and bus lane. This example is from Portland. The left side bike lane. If you have the bus lane on the side, can we put the bike lane on the left side as well to make sure we don't have conflicts? This image that you're seeing is the bike pedestrian mixing platform. So passengers would wait here, and then once a bus comes, they would just cross the bike lane and then go over the island. The idea is for buses not to be able to pulling in and cutting over the bike lane and creating a conflict. And then the last 2 are the narrow floating bus island and the wide floating bus island, which is here what you're seeing from Washington, DC. So quickly on the toolbox usage, again, I mentioned this earlier, these are not implemented as a capital project. And the idea is to be able to expedite the process of identifying treatments and applying them and designing them with the goal of implementing most of this in-house rather than requiring rather than the need to generate a larger project. So quickly, I'm going to go over how can we use it again. So as an agency, you still need to define the problem, obviously. If you don't know what the problem is, you won't be able to know where to start from with these treatments. So let's say our problem is low bus speeds. Then there needs to be a little bit of preliminary analysis to understand, well, that's great, but what causes low bus speeds? Is it traffic delay? Is it, lots of people getting on and off? What's the problem that we're talking about here? So you need to talk about, you need to consider these various metrics. And let's say in this case, buses are making frequent stops with long dwell times. Now we know sort of the main reason for the problem. Now we can say, okay, let's try to identify what treatments we can apply. So we will take you to bus operation strategies because we know that those are the ones primarily tackle this problem. And then once you review the range of treatments and what objectives that they can address, we can say, well, you can possibly look at stop consolidation. You can also look at fare payment changes and older boarding as a starting point. So in terms of the implementation, so right now actually there are 2 corridors in Washington, D.C. that DETA is looking into to improve bus operations, and they're specifically applying this toolbox. So you still need to identify a corridor. You cannot say, hey, I have this entire system that I want to improve bus operations, which is great, but we need to first define what the problem is. The whole idea is let's not just do a lot of analysis, let's minimize that analysis as you're getting into the design stage. So just to wrap things up, what were some key takeaways? The process to develop the content was very important. There were, again, lots of internal and external stakeholder discussions to make sure everyone is comfortable with the treatments. The ranges and the thresholds that we provided made sense. And also, the treatments that we developed are in line with the goals and objectives of the agencies. So with that, I would like to wrap up my presentation, and I guess I'll turn it back over. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Dr. Cesme. At this time, I'd like to open the floor up for questions. There have been a couple that have rolled in that I'll go ahead and ask our presenters to address. The first question is, what happens to the battery of a bus after it has met its full life and no longer able to store energy? How is it disposed of? Eric, Dale, or Hannah, would y'all like to address that?
Well, this is Dale. It goes back to this Redwoods recyclers that Eric mentioned earlier. Those batteries, essentially what they do is grind the batteries up, and then they chemically separate the lithium and the nickel and the aluminum that the shells are made out of. And so they chemically separate those and are able to reuse them. So the majority of a lithium ion battery is recyclable material.
Bill, I have one comment to that, is that I know in Greensboro, when we were looking at that, and at some point the batteries do lose storage capacity and they are heavy. So at some point you may want to pull them out of the bus, but they can still store energy. And one thing we had talked about is, taking those batteries and using them to charge buses at night and then recharge those batteries via solar power during the day.
Yes, and we have our first project like that underway right now. But once they have reached their full end of a battery, when it's taken out of a bus, has about 80% state of life left in it. And it's good to 30–40% state of life. So it spends 10 to 12 years in a bus, and then it goes to energy storage. And so 20 years or so down the road, it then goes to a recycler. And at end of life, that's how it's recycled.
Thanks. Another question, how do electric buses contribute to transportation infrastructure due to not providing a gas tax? And Hannah, you might be able to answer that. Sure. It's my understanding, I don't think fuels for transit use are taxed anyway.
That's right. The public agencies' purchase of fuel is exempt from all tax. So we weren't contributing when we were buying diesel, and we're not contributing when we're buying electric either.
Right. Are there any more questions out there? That's the only two that I have seen so far. For Dr. Cesme on how to improve traffic, or the flow of traffic flow. I keep wanting to go back to traffic flow. I'm sorry, I'm an old traffic engineer, but how to improve efficiency along corridors for transit operations. And then women in transportation, any questions follow up there? Okay, I'm not getting any new questions in. Again, would really like to thank our presenters today. And I think someone mentioned that, yeah, thanks for letting transit peek under the tent into your agency. No, we welcome all modes of travel. I know maybe our name, and we've talked about the name of the Institute of Transportation Engineers, maybe has the connotation that we're only focused on traffic or traffic flow or road building, but no, we're interested in all modes of travel. We're just trying to, I think we're as a profession, we're focused on moving all people, all modes safely, efficiently, and equitably. And I think we touched on some of that, all of those here today, even if you may think, well, women in transportation, well, the demographics show that they're using it more, using transit more. So, and I'll say, well, what benefits one demographic benefits all demographics. You're improving the transit experience for women, you're improving it for men as well. Same thing goes for improving the movement of buses along arterials. If you're improving the flow of buses along an arterial, you're also improving that arterial for other modes of travel. So it all comes together for advocating for all modes of travel. So thank you all for your contribution, and then even Dale and Eric on the kind of the bus mechanical side, and your contributions to the industry. What you're doing, what I see is it saves in the cost of providing transportation to the public, and by saving cost, we can reinvest those savings back into making our transportations even more safe and efficient. So thank you all. I would like to also thank our hosts of this meeting, Christina Whitfield, who works for Kimley Horn and Associates. She's kind of been behind the scenes helping those like me who are somewhat technically challenged navigate these virtual meetings, which we've all grown to love and or hate. So with that, we will end our session now. Thank you.